NOS4A22, Book 2, Trust No One, Chapter 13, Either Before or After. Cammy and Stu shared one disturbing feeling that wouldn't leave the forefront of their minds. Constantly pressing on top of all the other things they were thinking about was this notion that was as if their extra dimensional senses were showing them to not ignore. They knew they must listen to their gut feelings here and trust these strong feelings. What bothered them the most was that they didn't know if they could act on what they felt they knew. They had no idea how to act on these strange feelings either. They knew the things that were happening to them and had happened in particularly similar ways with identical details. They also knew that people involved had sensed certain things about other people, either before or after occurrences. Some things were repeat occurrences, other things of this same nature and derivative were premonitions of things to come. Poor Cammy and Stewart felt visions that were things yet to come. The future visions haunted them because of the things that were haunting them from the past. Things of the past were becoming living nightmares of the things they would foresee in the near future. Their minds were finding ways to combat these brain-collapsing thoughts. As if Cammy and Stewart's brains weren't already collapsing, they had to make sense of these things before nightfall, since their extra-dimensional spiritual senses could not be ignored, since they were too powerful. They couldn't let these feelings paralyze or cripple them, as they knew it could easily happen if they let it consume them negatively. So Cammy began telling Stu what she was thinking of these thoughts and feelings. Stu would listen, give his thoughts, and they would try to make sense of it, since they had no idea how to deal with these serious concepts that destroyed reality within the three-dimensional flesh and blood world. Cammy had a feeling that somehow a spirit of good was intervening and letting them know that what they were going through had happened before, and not to fear, because what they are feeling has been conquered by people not as strong as well as less capable because of being alone. Children have endured such attacks, as well as frail old people, both weak in mind and in the body. Love got them through. Love got them all through. So, these were the heavenly thoughts that strengthened them in their undying will to go on, to conquer the evil and their constant attacks. Although their chance was small and gave only a short window of time, as well as the odds not being in their favor as far as circumstance was involved due to the manipulation of extra-dimensional dark spirit world reality on top of the regular things seen and experienced in the regular world, Cammy and Stu were given hope from these bright sensations of hope. These feelings seemed to come from within as well as put there, like a spirit was put in them. What a beautiful feeling they experienced among all the hellish torture they continued to endure. Beauty and suffering was a concept Cammy embraced her whole life, considering her family life she could not bring up. If she mentioned things that happened, she would break down, not being able to recover, so she avoided speaking of things ever again, like when she did before as a teen. That one and only time while doing so made things worse for her in every possible way. So her defense was the same thing eating away at her insides emotionally. Cammy was able to express her shared feelings about these things to Stewart, and it relieved her in a way she needed all her life. She thought it to be funny since she was getting the relief she needed her whole life as she was preparing to exit her life in the flesh. Stewart was thankful to help give her this relief, and at the same time it made him incredibly sad to know that her suffering was so great as a child that it stuck with her all the way to her young adult life. He could relate with the pain, but the difference was he had no problem sharing his experiences with Cammy. He wished she would share the things with him without devastating herself in the process, but this wasn't a possibility as long as they had flesh bodies with tender emotions such as hers, in which she kept buried inside her whole life, pretending to be stronger than what she really is, although she knew as well as Stu knew how strong she was. She was fighting the legions of evil forces that have all the power of hell. Through these complex thoughts and feelings they were sharing in these critical moments, their critical thinking didn't stop them from doing what they needed to do miraculously. Those other shadow beings were finished putting out the fires in the forest where they were actually in, and they immediately after doing so were commanded to punish directly through the extra-dimensional layer they were given permission to break. The Mothmen broke through along with the Dark Seraph and the Ofen Lords. All their children followed. This was the largest swarm of dark shadow beings and evil spirits that had ever been summoned to fly together at once since the fall of these majestically dark evil entities. Such creatures in such a swarming formation were so terrifying to behold that no one in their right mind could process the incoming terror without fainting. Good for them, Cammy and Stu had been prepared, as they prepared themselves through the extensive chemical drug mind training. They knew that no one should do what they did. They knew they were crossing the line for the sake of their own pleasure, and it was the only selfish act they had ever gone through within their entire lives. Yet, they continued to cross those lines in dangerous repetition until they went too far. No one had went as far as they had in this matter, and it was so ghastly that they knew it was why their trial was extra frightening. Because even the devil himself didn't know how to handle their punishment. It was a new experience for all the legions of hell. The entire host of hell spread out in all dimensions and were being tested with the fate and judgment of Cammy and Stu. Their case was unique. Creation was having a new expansion because of their end of life within their flesh bodies. People could write New Age books and philosophy about their story and their journey, but sadly this would never be the case. It is a miracle their story here ever was able to be told at all. And it is because there is a glitch in time and space, as their story was broadcast through the secret hidden technology the government keeps secret. That is how and why there is such an incredibly detailed narrative, in case you were wondering, and that is the real horror of this horror tragedy story. The black government in which Lamb has control of likes the general population of the flesh and blood world to believe the illusion of privacy through secrecy. In reality, of course, there are no secrets about the things people do in everyday life. This is the only real secret that intellectuals already suspect, as if they already know it to be fact and common knowledge. Not at all secret, even though this is kept secret, so there doesn't have to be mass genocide from the exposed truth of the evil in charge. Asking the question why is the quickest way to become trapped in that mental prison. Cammy and Stu always returned there, and were still returning there constantly, as usual. Answers for their many questions were not to be found and inaccessible. The mysteries intensified all the more whenever they dug and thought about things. They desperately needed to forget about looking for answers as to why things happened to them, because pity was out of the question. There was no room for pity, and there certainly never was. Pity was reserved for children, and their time had come and gone, leaving them coming up empty. Their parents were fresh out of sympathy before their children's lives had begun. Doomed from the start. So you could say that Cammy and Stu never had a chance. Mentally, this is where they dwelled. They learned to be thankful, looking forward to the end of their lives, as it was just around the corner. No matter how much they tried to escape those evil entities, though, they eventually caught up with them. The swarm of winged shadow beings like the Mothmen had surrounded them. The eyes glared and made them nauseated to the point of vomiting. And vomiting is a more unpleasant act for the vomiter than you might think for the affected spirit body. Cammy and Stu were spewing out their inner heart and soul, trying to retrieve them as they came up out of their ghostly mouths. Their essences poured out onto the strange alien ground. A misty spew cascaded down onto the chromed floor of this strange land, and it spattered back up at them. Appalling to this sight, their spiritual eyes, out of reaction, closed to protect their minds from further damaging psychodrama. Their spirit hearts were not able to be grasped by their spiritual bodies' limbs and hands, so they deflected the complete impact by flailing their limbs, then realized the attempt was futile. This caused Stu to first fall to the ground next to his heart, and when he forced his own apparition to fall, he had grabbed Cammie's spiritual body's arm to pull her down there with him to lay her head next to her own spiritual heart as well. She understood what he was doing, or trying to do, after only a second of confusion. So after she saw him open his apparition mouth as he lay with the side of his head on the ground, inhaling his own heart along with his spirit soul essence, she copied his actions and quickly did the same. When she did this, she thought this reminded her of a forgotten dream she had when she first began hanging out with Stu every day. Before she met him, she had a dream she had twice of meeting him, but the face never was revealed. He had taken off a mask in the dream when he was laying on the ground with her, not to show his face, but to swallow his own vomit. She wondered if that was what they were doing in the forest of the three-dimensional world where their flesh and blood bodies were. So once they did this, something went wrong, and their spirit bodies began doing something that was not controlled by them. Their heads began to split down the middle and were looking like two stretched out tentacles sprouting from a fishtail. The 2 points slithered with a crawl closely gripping the smooth chrome-like ground and stuck tightly, smoothing out the rest of their spirit bodies. When Stu and Cammie tried to fight it, they became bonded with the foreign ground even more. Whatever was in them now was controlling them, and it was intensifying in strength, sending panic and sensations of fear through their changing forms. They thought it couldn't be the blood possession because it must have been from the shadow beings. It was the blood possession, though, because cleverly the winged shadow legions fanned the blood demons in a light vapor over an exhausting period of time, and finally enough had entered their lungs to have taken over their flesh and blood bodies. Now it had become nearly impossible to resist the will and command of Lamb. Cammie and Stu were really scared now. The blood demons were invading their thoughts in a violating intrusion. Steward was watching a memory into which they were tapping. It was mind-raping. Cammie was trying to put a halt on all of this as she hurt herself trying to break free. Her resistance was preventing the blood demon entities to get to her locked up memories, but it was severely draining her of her strength and essence. Stewart was going to have to help her, but first he had to break free of this latching on within his own mind, as he let them go straight to what the little evil entities wanted in his mind. Those little blood demons went and opened a memory of Stu from his first taste of dead human flesh. It was not as he had remembered. First, he thought it was as he remembered, but the tapping into his mind by the demonic outside forces were showing him otherwise. He remembered as a young man not that long ago giving in to his curiosity, tasting the formaldehyde, before he pumped a dead body of a young woman who died from drug overdose. It fascinated him that this girl accidentally killed herself from pleasure-seeking. He first licked his fingertips as some excessive chemicals leaked out of the tube he was holding, plugging them with his one hand, while his other hand pinched off the tube like a garden hose, trying to water the yard. He had taken a sliver of flesh from this young woman's thigh, close to the private areas of her anatomy Stewart was examining with his eyes unintentionally, out of curiosity. Stewart cut a small piece out of the young woman's inner thigh and quickly shoved it in his mouth and savored the dead flesh, moving it around in his mouth with his tongue as if he were tasting fine wine at some fancy wine tasting event. Suddenly, some cubes began falling from the strange colored dark sky that was tinted with the color of blood. This sign let them know what it meant that the blood demons had come. The cubes were changing the ground where they fell. Then, as Cammy and Stu saw these things beginning to happen and fought still to spare their remaining energy, Stu was hit with the truth. It has a solid brick of truth about his real first cannibalistic experience. It was not as he remembered it. He was at a daycare with Cammy's parents in England when his parents took him that one and only time they went on a vacation. It wasn't just some leisurely casual vacation with no real plans other than getting away to relax and sightsee. His parents were a part of the real satanic sect of devil worshippers who sacrificed children, babies, newly born, as well as slave mothers, kidnapped people of all ages, along with adults who were both willingly and unwillingly sacrificed to Satan for their wealth and power. When Stu was barely old enough to have solid memories before grade school, he went to a hidden mansion deep within the forest of England's most remote area, where the evil elite hid to partake in the vilest practices they had been carrying out since before the time of the prophet Elijah. Stu was shown a memory that had always been there in his mind, but it was tucked away to protect himself from the horrors of these evil people, who he saw kill people in front of his eyes just for suspecting they would potentially tell their secrets. So Stu was being shown these things by the blood demons who possessed him, and it all made sense to him now as to why Cammy was the way she was. She was protecting herself the same way Stewart always protected himself. Stu mustered all the mental fortitude he had within himself and encouraged himself to share his feelings of these thoughts to strengthen and empower Cammy, because he knew it would work once they shared these thoughts and feelings, as the evil entities worked to weaken them, for the fate Lamb taught them to be inevitable. Their fate of eternal burning in the lake of fire was not inevitable, however, because although Cammy and Stu were born into the hands of the devil, they were given the gift of true love through each other since the very start. They didn't realize their significance in the grand scheme of things until this epiphany revelation struck them through their darkest times. The light of this truth lit their hope within the darkness. The pain that wept from their spirit and drained from their essence flowed like an overflowing stream in the darkness of their suffering, and beautifully watered their souls as they suffered. The punishment was gladly welcomed, and they embraced letting the fight cease within them, because they knew that real true love was within them, and their destiny was not to end the way that the evil forces wanted. Stu saw that memory clearly, and as the blood demons projected the events as they were in that recorded moment in time. Cammy and Stu knew each other when they were children in those weeks that turned into nearly a month of satanic ritual and sacrifice. Cammy's parents were the high satanic priests of England, which had power over the United States from old. The true satanic black world government who divided political beliefs to serve the will of Satan. The same governmental powers who controlled pharmaceutical supergiants, along with all media outlets, carrying out their brainwashing agendas. This was the real enemy, not portrayed by the evangelicals, who also serve Satan under the cover of their darkness. The real devils in the flesh are spread out in these factions. The real terror was that since they were young and these rituals were carried out, the powers that be initiated the beginning of the new age of Satan, along with his final reign of absolute power. So in these weeks when Cammy and Stu first met, they were conditioned and drugged to forget. This explains their morbid fascination with the drugs and chemicals. The worst fact that was revealed to them was the cannibalism factor. They were force-fed human flesh of all the various types of victims, including babies and infants, along with their sacrificed mothers, who were otherwise virgins impregnated through blasphemous rape rituals soaked in the blood of previous mother-infant sacrifices. This vile cycle of bloodshed repeated continuously to keep Satan near them and recognize the elite group to be the most evil leaders of the true world government who called the shots since the beginning of time. They had power to reveal the gatekeeper beyond judgment, and they also had the keeper of time by their side through these perverse dark rituals. Lamb, however, kept himself hidden to them, as he was Satan's secret weapon beyond the dark nether realm, extra dimensions. These architects of war, who were the destroyers of nations, destroyed in every capable way, exploiting the elements of the lands under their control to further destroy the health of the environment, as well as create greed that would result in further bloodshed along with the creation of money that was their currency to control. And so this was the family that Cammy was born into. Steward's parents were in the business of death and covered up countless murders that not only were satanic sacrifices, but calculated and planned killings for the Dark Master's gain within the underworld. So Cammy and Stu finally saw the truth that they were children who were born into evil. It broke their hearts but strengthened them in the same moment, as they were forced to see in real time the playback of that gruesome month within Cammy's childhood home. Cammy never thought she would ever be able to tell Stu of these things, and now the evil entities made it to where she never had to. What was not revealed was that she never simply moved to the United States with her parents, or even alone. She never moved, and this fact, along with the tragic facts of this matter, must be revealed until the end of their story for complete understanding. Cammy and Stu were victims of their parents. Their deaths would not be in vain. Their story, as said, was documented by the same black government of the darkest evil powers and released by a loophole that exposed their secrets to the outside world, previously fooled completely by the measures put in place since mass media and technology advanced in the new age of Satan and satanic rule. Oh, how we all have been fooled, forever playing the fool, as the powers that be dictate every aspect of life through complete manipulative control. These sickening people who Cammy and Stu's parents were a part of have set the stage through their continual ritual sacrifices for the things that were happening to the world through extra-dimensional spreading of dark power. This is how evil spread and grew. Lamb was the secret weapon. Lamb was the master craft architect of war and suffering in every form. Stu and Cammy's mission was nothing outside of their personal desires that love had put in place for them and their shared fate. The result, however, was the release of information pertaining to these sensitive facts of secret governmental control by the real hidden powers that be. The evil demonic forces who always had their demons in the flesh in those seats of power throughout the earthly kingdoms, which collectively combined were and always have been the kingdom of evil since life has ever been created on earth. Now that the information was instilled in them about their families in which they subconsciously blocked out, Cammy and Stu no longer needed to put up a wall of defense around the guarded memories because now they gathered strength from their secret hidden truth. They now knew the reason they were given a chance to be saved from the second death in the lake of fire. They were given lives to suffer in torment so that they might be redeemed in death to be given the eternal reward and escape eternal burning. The blood demons, as they showed them these things of their traumatic childhood, brought pain to every living cell within them. Each cell within them was fighting a war they could not win, but even still their spirits prevailed. It was their spirits within them, as they experienced those last days of their lives in their spirit bodies, that carried their flesh bodies through their journey. The strong spirits within them were being massacred in every possible way, and because of their undying endurance, they kept angering the destroyers who tested their fate. They mapped out the attacks in their shared thought process. They noticed patterns of specifics, although there was no actual pattern of methods, since there was a new style of attack every time. What Cammy and Stu could map out, though, were levels of pain and the timing fluctuations along with before, during, and after each phase of torture. Mathematically, they knew every single charted equation of pain versus time. The chemicals that were deteriorating their living cells, along with the blood demons that worked to destroy them from within, also gave them unnatural intelligence. This was due to the tearing away of the dying cells around fresh ones. The inner layers of brain cells and heart cells that corresponded with their thought processes were rapidly becoming exposed as the dead cells around the inner core quickly shed from the living remainder. The war for their shared soul was being waged and fought on every possible plane of existence, not limited to the extra dimensional layers of reality beyond the flesh body. There were battles in every form of life that were the extension of their form. Until the evening, they wrestled with these demons that were in the blood, and it prepared them for the demonic beasts that were to come. They knew the worst was yet to come, and it was going to get a whole lot worse, even if they couldn't properly visualize or begin to imagine how that could be possible, considering what they have endured up to this point. Beasts were lying in wait just beyond the spiritual dark realm within the spaces in between. So long as Cammy and Stu configured their next courses of action best as they could, they would be able to resist their complete domination. First, though, they had to overcome the possession of the blood demons as they stripped away the infected, damaged cells that comprised most of their anatomy from all the abuse they put their bodies with, what with all the chemicals, drugs, and dead flesh that consisted of countless harmful bacteria, viral disease, parasites, along with natural decomposition of chemicals, along with decay. All this together eroded their systems, and not only vascular. Cammy and Stu became wise in their torment. This demonic torment was cleansing them as the rot within them was being cast away from their untouched cells, but they needed to fight to stay unharmed from the war that was being carried out within them. That black rot within their brains was left mushy around the brain and just under their outer skulls. It was a cloud of resin that had nowhere to go, so Lamb ordered the shadow dwarves to come and penetrate their scalps in the flesh and blood world. As Cammy and Stu lay on the ground in the deep wilderness of the forest outside of the city suburbs, the demonic little ones crept to them just as evening arrived, about an hour before sunset. They came from the shadows behind the trees. The demonic entities took the form of gnomes, who had distorted bodies and walked with backwards leaning posture. Their legs were bent in such a way that they almost fell back, or seemed to appear that way anyway, when they tippy-toed as they crept towards Cammy and Stu, who lay on the ground fighting the war within their blood. The different demonic winged shadow creatures gathered around their bodies like vultures, resting on the tops of the trees in a crouching gargoyle-like posture, signifying eager anticipation of the draining that was about to take place. What was about to take place was another damning ritual that Cammy and Stu were not about to escape, but yet again only have to endure as best as they could. The shadow dwarves, resembling distorted gnomes, came with little knives and straws made of plant stems belonging to nipped flowers. The little gnomes threw the petals in the air as they were hallucinogenic and let their magic do their work. They made an incision to the temples of their heads and poked the stem straws inside, draining the blackness surrounding their brains, only to gather the substance to siphon it and redirect the black chemical resin to their throats. The other small incision these evil creatures made was in their windpipes, poking the triangular three-way tube inside as they blew at the third end, sucking the black out of their skulls, then blowing in the other end to send the black goop down their throats, after carefully pinching off, then releasing the poison to be shot down to their stomachs. The purpose of this was not to kill them. Lamb ordered this so that although the minds of Cammy and Stu were purified from the harmful resin that surrounded their deteriorating minds, the redirection to their stomachs would leave a lasting impression in their guts to permanently sit unwell in their fortitude and bring them down low with their spirit for the remainder of their time in the flesh. Sadness was intensified because of this sinister act carried out in the early evening to keep them low. It most certainly worked, as Lamb knew it would. The poison that had reached their stomachs created in their flesh bodies a weaker spirit that settled and rested there until they would be dead. The chances they would fail in their mission to escape the second death, to be punished in eternal burning at the bottom of the lake of fire, was taken to a percentage that was next to nothing, for they barely had a chance. Hope was stripped bare to the bone at the foundation, just as their minds had been stripped of all those dead, decayed layers they had damaged around the surface of their brains, rotted away as a heavy price that now sat in the bottom of their stomachs and would settle forever in their guts until it was time for the maggots and worms to fulfill the way of all the earth.